Hi, everybody. We're just going to give a minute or so for people to join and then we'll get started. All right, I think we can go ahead and get underway. So I'm Matt Gross from the marketing team. Thank you for joining today's webinar about how modern private CAs bring order to complex infrastructure. This session is being recorded and we'll share that with you after we wrap up. If you have any questions, please add them to the Q&A section and we'll address them at the end of the presentation. Your presenters today are Brendan Bonner, Sales Engineering Director at Sectigo, and Jason Sirocco, Senior Fellow at Sectigo. Gentlemen, over to you.
Thank you, Matt. Hey, this is the agenda, folks. We're going to be talking about how some deadlines that are upcoming within our industry are going to affect you and really help you to understand how to avoid issues that might be coming probably in a period that's a little bit less than a year from now. We're trying to ring the bell on some important topics. We're going to be talking about how the fact that many of you have been using publicly trusted PKI infrastructure for a very long time for purposes that they were probably never built for. There's reasons why people have been doing that. They might not even be completely aware, and they're just not going to be there for you within that time frame. So the thing is, what you're really looking for here is probably from some fast wins that are going to allow you to be able to feel like you're on your way to understanding where you need to be within this time period, but you certainly don't have any time to waste. And I think that the wider topic that Brendan and I are going to cover is really about modernizing right now, just in the short term, very short term, modernizing your awareness of the way that PKI, private certificate authorities, what they can do for you, especially in this world around zero trust, this world around that really kind of centers around putting better locks in the doors, better authentication schemes using one of the best credential form factors there is, which is digital certificate. And then, of course, the homework assignment, the ability to take a 90-day roadmap, move it from just awareness to then, geez, what do I do next? And then having complete control over what the situation is. But we got to explain it first. Next slide, please.
Hey, Jason, you don't have your video on if you don't mind.
For these, we typically we will remain without. So that's where we're going to be. So, folks, the ground is shifting somewhat, and I think go ahead, Matt. Next slide. We're gonna talk about what the issue actually was. We're gonna dive right in. Brendan, you want to cover some of what is going on here?
Yeah, so I would say one of the biggest ones that we have seen that customers are really kind of afraid of is client authentication being removed, which is that June 15th date there. So client auth, customers are using that for mutual TLS. And basically when they have that out there, they're authenticating two different entities at the same time. And they're using public trust on this when it really should be decoupled from public and into a private environment. So it's a major concern that any certificate we have out there for mutual TLS, we want to kind of look at and how we can move that over to a private environment. Next March, sorry, I'm kind of going out of order here, but next March 15th, we're going to go from 398-day certificate lifespans down to 200 days. That's that first jump when it comes to certificates being reduced in time, ultimately to 2029 to 47 days. But that first jump in that 200 days really means for customers that they're doing double the certificate deployments that they have been. It's 2 times per year. So something to look into, starting getting that automation path for certificate deployments. because when we get down to 2027 and 2029 with 147-day certificates, we ultimately need to have some kind of automation in place to reduce those certificate lifespans. So that's what's happened on the public side. I know there's mainly focus on private, but where we can take our public certificates and move them into a private environment, it benefits not only you, but it also makes your environment more secure.
Brandon, I think what you're really trying to say here, I'm going to back it up and make it really clear for everybody. You are dealing with three intertwined issues, and not the least of which is shortened certificate lifespans. You're dealing with another issue, which we're going to cover a little bit more in depth, which is the fact that publicly trusted certificates for the purposes of client authentication, Google, within their Chrome root store program, has said that basically no root will be trusted that allows for multi-usage publicly trusted roots that include client authentication certificates. Therefore, that's what this time frame that Brendan just lined out for you also includes. So these things are all happening at once, right lockstep with the whole concept of PQC readiness. All three things at once, folks. So, that's a lot to take in on the first slide of content here. Hopefully, we're going to, dive in a little more and start talking about what these things actually mean. Next slide. So, folks, you've heard us talk about before shortened certificate lifespans. And right now, with a 398-day certificate, basically you're probably renewing that every year, and that those extra few days beyond the 365 days are really all about giving you some extra grace on top of that 365 days of usage of the certificate itself. Some of you go to the last minute and that's fine, but it helps to understand the math a little bit. If you actually take that certificate and you actually do renew that 398-day certificate every year, and we end up going down to 200-day, 100-day, and eventually 47-day certificates, you're probably now dealing with what essentially are monthly renewal cycles every 30 days, taking advantage of that extra 17 days of grace. And therefore, that's how you get to this 2 times renewal cycle, 4 times renewal cycle, and eventually by 2029, 12 times the amount of renewal. And folks, I don't know if you think about it like this, but I think what's important to note is at that point, when you are renewing certificates monthly, it really means that manually renewing certificates, even if you have more than just a handful, that's a lot of work. And that amount of work is going to be multiplying up to 12 by 2029. It's not just the amount of work, it is actually the amount of chances of error. And Brendan could tell you that that's a major issue here. But Brendan, talk a little bit about how domain control validation also becomes part of this issue.
Yeah, so as lifespans of certificates shrink, DCV validation will also shrink. And we kind of follow the path. So in next year, when it goes to 200 days, we'll have 200-day DCV. In 2027, when we have 100-day, we'll have 100-day DCV. But the interesting one is when we go down to 2029, with 47-day certificates, we'll have 10-day DCV. And what that means for you is that you'll have to do domain validation each time every 10 days. Most customers are utilizing either DNS or email validation to take care of that. Ultimately, I think email validation will kind of fall out and go into DNS validation like pretty much all the time. And that's because we can now make that process automatable. So there's definitely tools where our customers are looking in today to validate that and automate that domain control validation within their environment so that they don't have to go and click a button every 10 days.
Brendan, I'd like to now get to the center part of this slide. I'm going to have you kick in to talk about which use cases are applicable here.
Yep.
What it says in the slide is that public certs will be no longer work for internal mutual TLS. And I think that that's some colloquial language for really meaning the fact that you will not be able, after June of 2026, to be able to have a publicly trusted certificate issued for the usage of these use cases that I'm going to have Brendan talk about in a moment. So it really is all about the every one of the CAs right now, including Sectigo, has now published timelines around when we're going to stop issuing publicly trusted certificates for the purpose of client authentication. And I think that that's a lot of words, that's a lot of complexity up front for those of you who aren't sure what that means. I think what is most important to understand is the types of use cases that you are using those certificates for. And I'll kick it off, Brendan, by saying the most common use case is if you are using your publicly trusted certificate, putting it into a web server, putting it into a load balancer for the really the standard purposes of using the identity of a domain, proving the identity of a domain, being able to make sure that your customers are able to get to a website, could be internal, could be external, doesn't really matter. If it's a browser talking to a web server of some sort, you're good. It's everything else that we are worried about, and understanding those use cases is key. Brendan's one of the best people I know who can help to describe what those use cases are.
Yeah, so it's a lot of when different entities, it might be entities within a localized environment. It might be one organization talking to another organization to create a secure authenticated a channel between the two entities. And so what's happening is a certificate has two different extended key usages. Public certificates that we're talking about, they have server authentication and they have client authentication. And the industry is removing client authentication, which is having a client establish that trust within your environment. And so ultimately, we see this a lot in the banking industry. We see that a lot with different API connections, securing your API between two different entities utilizing MTLS. It's unfortunately really hard for our clients to figure out because all certificates have both server auth and client auth. There's no scan that I can say, well, this certificate's using client auth. I don't have that visibility. So what's the best path forward is to talk to who's deploying those certificates and ask, are you utilizing these certificates for mutual TLS, or are you using these certificates for authentication outside of server authentication? And then the best path forward, and we'll get into it, would be moving to a private CA.
Thanks so much for that, Brendan. So if you look at the rest of this, it calls out the fact that a lot of legacy PKI has issues. And one of the biggest issues that I'm going to call out, it's not in this slide, but I'll call it out, is visibility. The fact that there's probably a ton of private certificate or authorities that exist in the world today that you might not be aware of. You might actually have a lot of good governance around the usage of publicly trusted certificates, but private certificate authorities that you might be using, you might not even be aware that they're there. And that's a major problem of visibility. And then, of course, the quantum threat. And really, what this is about is I think what takes all of these concepts and puts them under a singular conceptual thread is the fact that if we did a homework exercise right now, and I asked you guys, how many of your certificates are based on RSA versus ECC cryptographic algorithms? Could you just snap a finger and get me that answer? How many of your certificates have that special designation of being client authentication certificates and you're using them as such versus TLS server certificates? Do you have that information at your fingertips? I fear that a lot of you might not be able to pass that homework exercise. And that's why we're calling all of this out, not on separate slides, but on one slide, because visibility to all of it is what brings all these problems together. Thanks. Next slide. Brendan, you want to take this?
Yeah. So why the industry is changing this is, public CA certificates, especially in TLS, should be, utilized um, for server authentication for public entities. So we want to make sure that some of the old tools that we're utilizing today with public certificates maybe should be moved into a private CA. And so some of the things that we're looking at is where we can't have the specific EKUs any longer because we're only stuck to server authentication. When we're looking at IAM or MDM or CID pipelines, where we want to move those into private environments. So the idea is to look out for certificates that are not utilizing the proper key usages and move them into a private environment.
Thanks for that. Guys, we could spend the entire webinar probably on this slide going through why this occurred, how we ended up to this point in history. But isn't it surprising, Brendan, that this to me it's the final shoe that is going to drop around multi-usage within publicly trusted certificates. That's really the big change that's happening. I don't think a lot of people remember the fact that you used to be able to do signing operations with publicly trusted certificates. You could do other things with it, but finally, client authentication is the final multi-usage within publicly trusted certificates, and they're going to become pure TLS server certificates for that use case that involves web servers, any kind of load balancers, anything that's talking to a web browser. The reason why we got to this point is because it was simply simpler to be able to get your digital certificates from a public CA for decades. And that changed. This ain't your grandpa's PKI and legacy private certificate authorities that just were too complex to set up. People's thoughts that you could only afford to really set up one complex, large private CA and use it for all sorts of internal usages instead of having multiple private internal certificate authorities. Folks, those days are over. There's no reason anymore to use publicly trusted certificates in ways that are inappropriate, and there's no reason to continue to overburden your legacy private certificate authorities. These are important messages that might be new to you, but we're ringing the bell because Google's root store program under Chrome is going to force the issue with this taking out of this capability, this critical capability that many of you had been relying on for a long time. June 2026 will be the end of it. Next slide, please. What happens if you do not do anything? Let's say you didn't hear about this webinar. You didn't hear from experts like Brendan. Well, Chrome, which is of course, Google's browser, they have a root store program, just like Apple, just like Mozilla, just like Microsoft. They have a lot of influence in terms of the way that publicly trusted certificates are used, a lot of influence over the way what publicly trusted certificate authorities can do and what they can issue. And so all of these use cases that Brendan was talking about, this root store program change is what's causing all of the certificate authorities to be able to have to say, look, there's a final date from which there will be issuance of these types of publicly trusted certificates. And we're talking about, of course, is client authentication certificates. These are the use cases on the left that are important. Brendan has read those out to you previously. We're probably going to do this again because it's absolutely worth it. But let's get down to what is absolutely at risk. Well, it really comes down to, I think many of you are at increased outage risk, not of your websites. Those certs are going to work just fine. You might find that you have systems that are going to live through June of 2026, the ability to get certificates that are fresh for renewal of certificates that are dropping off of their expiry dates that are currently being used for client authentication. Now, Brendan, you got away with words. Help me with that one.
I'm sorry, say that again, Jason.
Yeah, so Brendan, what I'm talking about is restate the use cases that people have to be evaluating where they are using publicly trusted certificates
Yep.
and understanding what will happen once these due dates start to fall off.
So it's one thing that I like about what Citigo had done here is we're getting out early, we're removing client authentication because when we remove certificates with clients, often you're using your VPN and your API connection between your two different systems. It will break temporarily, and then we can kind of fix that solution because there's no way, as I described earlier, to discover the existing certificates that are being used for this use case. We can break it for a very short period of time, and then we can deploy with the proper certificate up until next year. Next year, as I mentioned, with that June 15th date, client authentication is going away entirely, and you would have to you'd have to move to a private CA at that point. So it's kind of the cool thing that Citigo has done to get ahead of this is those VPN connections, those mobile devices, those server authentications to APIs, SSO, connections, secure connections between two entities, all could potentially break when we remove client auth out of these public certificates.
Thanks for that. Matt, next slide. So a modern private certificate authority. Brendan, I think you wanted to cover this.
Yeah, this is one that is true to my heart. So and Jason, I think it is to you too as well. But when I hear customers kind of process what's happening, and we're moving and decoupling some of the use cases of a public environment into a private environment, they're like, okay, well, maybe I should dust off that Active Directory certificate services environment that I have. And ultimately, that's not going to scale. A lot of these systems are not secure. They're on old hardware, maybe Windows Server 2012, and it's coming up for expiration, end of life within their environment. And what a better solution would be is to get into a more scalable private CA. A private CA that is on HSMs that can be easily scaled and retooled for different use cases outside of that Active Directory environment. Private certificates that have different types of ability to move from key type to key type to be crypto agile themselves. And that's really important to look from what a modern private CA looks like. Jason, I know there's a lot of things that you would like to talk about in this as well.
Brendan, let's play in an interview format a little bit here. If I were a customer who, a person who's now concerned about this problem of having to switch from I've been using publicly trusted certificates for years and years for those use cases you pointed out before. And
Yep.
my only experience with private certificate authorities were, oh my goodness, I have a former multi-million-dollar implementation that took dozens and dozens of people to install. It takes a lot of money to maintain it. You're asking me now to use a new private certificate authority for things such as Wi-Fi access point publicly trusted certificates that I'm using currently? That sounds crazy. How do you respond to that?
It's not that hard. Citigo has the ability to create a new private CA within minutes, if not seconds. I could spin up one right now, and we can start deploying certificates. It's really just a matter of establishing the trust between where you want to have that private CA. And then we'll get to it. Even better is to start automating certificates directly to those end devices. And I just log into my dashboard, and away it goes. Just make sure that it's running smoothly, and I don't have to worry about it ever again. And so rather than building that infrastructure, finding pure current HSMs, figuring out hardware, or even if you went to a cloud environment, it's just easier to reach out to Cetigo, and we can create that infrastructure entirely for you.
So for those of you who are out there who are dealing with issues such as my Active Directory certificate services is not handling my modern use cases, I'm worried about post-quantum, it turns out that I am using publicly trusted certificates for where private certificates should be used. And there's a third one, and I see this all too often, Brendan. Things such as OpenSSL being used to create private certificate authorities because it's out there, within a few Linux commands, you can actually fire up and start getting certs out of it, but no visibility, no ability to put that as really part of a true governance program. It's meant for test purposes, and many of you people have these systems being set up by development folks, operations folks, and you have no idea that it's actually running your infrastructure. Those are three major use cases in total that are happening right now in everyone's enterprise, where you have to become aware of modern private certificate authorities. And thank you, Brendan. You did a great job going through that list. All right. So therefore, where your legacy tool stops and modern private CAs take over. So, Brendan, you are deeply steeped in each one of these things that people are doing today. I don't think we can read off this whole slide, but I'd love you to cherry pick some of these.
No, I think the most one I hear is definitely the API to API authentication. So utilizing, DevOps tools to authenticate. We want to move, those certificates often into a private environment. It's mostly, like I said, before, the entity to entity certificate authentication is the things that you're going to be having the biggest concern with. Let's see what else is in here. Wi-Fi authentication. If you're utilizing a public certificate for that, absolutely want to move to a private environment. It just makes total sense to be on a private environment. So some of the ones that you're seeing here are the big ones. Again, it's mainly talk to your team, discover why they would use a public certificate for client authentication, and then let's look at a way to modernize and deploy that with a proper certificate from a private environment, hopefully with automation as well.
There might be usage that is as simple as you're issuing publicly trusted certificates to salespeople in order to log into salesforce.com with a certificate.
Yep.
It's the right idea. I think using certificates for authentication, Brendan, it's a great idea. It's such a strong form factor compared to username and password and some weak form of MFA. It's a great authentication form factor. The answer, though, is you just simply won't be able to get your certificates from a public source anymore for that purpose. You're going to have to get it from a private CA. But as Brendan explained, this isn't your grandpa's PKI. The ability to stand up a private CA in minutes. This is what Brendan claimed. He's right. I've seen him do it with my own eyes. It only takes minutes. Really, what it takes, I think where some of those minutes really come from, Brendan, is really just simply understanding what the customer's needs actually are in terms of a certificate profile.
Yep.
That's where a few of those minutes actually come from. The button clicks are actually not much at all. But
The actual deployment is the minutes. There of course, Jason, I think you're alluding to is proper planning, making sure that you're compliant with your industry standards, making sure that you're planning for maybe 5, 10, 15 years. It's hard to get longer than that, especially as Jason, you'll talk about quantum looming. But it's proper planning, proper procedure prior. But the actual deployment is seconds at Cetigo.
So, folks, there is a lot on this slide. We can't read through all of it, but I guarantee everybody listening to this has one or more of these things that you're doing today where a modern private CA can really start to help out. And that bottom line, I love that bottom line, Brendan, which is there for those of you who have existing private certificate authorities, you know what all these terms mean. Trust me, there is absolutely no need to rip and replace anything you that works for you right now. It's not as scary as ripping and replacing. There, it's just bringing it into a governance fold by giving everything visibility. And trust me, it makes a big difference between an MSCA that's just out there in the wild, you're not sure what it's fully doing, and then having absolute visibility to it. It's just an absolute game changer. And so standing up a Sectigo private CA isn't just about standing up all these use cases on this list. It's also about giving blanket visibility to many of your other private CAs that you might be using today. Next slide.
Jason, I think real quick on that one too, Jason. I think
Yeah.
one thing that we have discussed, and customers are kind of hesitant to do this, but there's really no reason why. They kind of get into the idea that we want to have just one private CA. And there's no reason why we can't have multiple CAs. Figure out if your Microsoft CA is working good for you today, and we want to just bring it in for visibility, but you want a private CA for maybe like a Linux or Terraform environment, or maybe a Kubernetes environment. We can absolutely do that too. There's not a reason why you only have to have one CA.
Brendan, before I think that what's important here is, and I think even on this discovery slide where we can stay right now, I think, Brendan, just to follow up, one of the more interesting reasons why you might even want to have multiple private CAs is if you think about your business units individually, having the flexibility to have business units that might carve off over time, either through something as drastic as mergers and acquisition, or it could even be just the fact that you want more isolation between business groups. Having multiple private CAs is just completely makes sense. But Brendan is absolutely right. So, in terms of how do you actually operationalize some form of homework, really it comes down to building visibility. And one of the best ways you can build visibility with a modern certificate lifecycle management system is by using the discovery feature. And Brendan, give us some color on that.
Yeah, so Cetigo has I guess the first step of CLM is discovery, and Cetigo has Cetigo Certificate Manager, which we can discover your public and your private certificates. So we have a few different methods of discovery. One is just the public TLS. It just goes out to the different IP addresses, different host names that you select. It does a connection. If there's a certificate there, it'll download that and bring that into the tracking or into SCM for tracking purposes. Then Cetigo has two different private agents which we can install in your environment. We have what we call the network agent, which does the private TLS scan to different local host names or local IP addresses like your 1010 ranges. It does a TLS connection. If there's a certificate there, it's going to download that and bring that in. And we also have an MS agent, which will communicate to your existing Active Directory certificate services environment that you might have. It downloads that entire database of certificates and bring those in for tracking. So we'll keep track of everything within a certificate, different common names, SAN names, who issued the certificate, when it was issued, probably most importantly for everybody, when those certificates expire. We'll get visibility, notifications, and then we can look to modernize and look to deploy them with proper certificates in the future.
Interestingly, Brendan, before we move to the next slide, I think I want to underline this by saying a lot of you only think about certificate lifecycle management from the standpoint of publicly trusted certificates. Not enough of you think about certificate lifecycle management from having full visibility to your private certificate authorities. And that habit has to change. Having full visibility across everything and being able to have discovery capabilities even into some of your private systems is just an absolute game changer. And it's a concept that I don't think is just out there enough. Next slide,
Yeah,
please.
Jason, I
Yeah.
have customers that are on 1, 3, and 5 day certificates, and certain customers even on the private side, so that they can deploy certificates, rapidly. And I think honestly, Jason, it might be, watching one of your webinars on, Harvest and Decrypt that they're looking to have as shorter lived certificates as possible to make that problem, harder for the future. So yeah, to your point, Jason, a lot of customers focus on public certificate automation, but we have customers that are already on private automation to 1-day certificates.
Thanks so much for that. Brendan, you said it best earlier. Setting up a modern private certificate authority is a matter of literally minutes, and therefore the wins can be really fast. So for those of you who saw some really basic authentication use cases that Brendan was talking about earlier, hey, it could be just your VPN system to get certain kinds of administrators into sensitive systems internally. Right now, you might be using publicly trusted certificates for that will be going away at some point next year. That means that might be your first way to attempt dipping the toes into a fast win of standing up a private certificate authority. You're the person, Brendan, who's doing that on a daily basis. Talk to us about what that really looks like here.
Yeah, so I have, customers that are on those, legacy, they have those public use cases, and they've, made the switch, to that private CA. So we, built the private CA, then we kind of, understand what the use cases that are out there. We do that discovery to understand when the biggest certificate that comes up, or like the certs that are coming up with the expiration the soonest, they're probably going to be prioritized. And then we were looking to use different integrations to automate those certificates immediately. So what I think is best for clients, especially as we go into the shorter lived certificate world, is to build as many pre-built integrations as possible, rather than develop and build it yourself. And Cedigo does a pretty good job. We have 50+ integrations. We'll get to that in a little bit, but discover, figure out what's the biggest issue is, then start automating those. That's what the best path forward is for our clients.
Thanks for that. Next slide. So, therefore, all of this comes together. This is what we talked about, Brendan and I were talking about at the very beginning. I think for every team right now needs to be a forward-looking team because there's a number of needs that are all coming together. And I think that one of the elephants in the room right now is the need for cryptographic agility. Just about everything Brendan and I have been talking about so far really falls under the category of certificate agility. That ability to have visibility to certificates, that ability to quickly renew certificates with automation technologies, provisioning technologies, that's all certificate agility. But what's coming, folks, is also the need for cryptographic agility because of the fact that the cryptographic algorithms that all of this is underlined by is going to have to change and will be deprecated in the 2030 to 2035 timeframe. That's coming fast. Next slide, please. So, really, for any cybersecurity exercise, the number one thing you have to do is to have that visibility. How do you do that visibility? Well, Brendan just gave you clue number one. You use certificate lifecycle management and use the discovery function and start building a comprehensive inventory of all of your cryptographic assets, beginning with digital certificates. And that that really is the beginning of it. So I would say that certificate lifecycle management really is step one in all ways to preparing for the post-quantum era. Brandon, I'm sure you have tons of opinions on this.
Yeah.
Go for it.
Yeah, I completely agree. It's important to be crypto agile, as also to be CA agile. We just went through a large distrust with Entrust public certificates. When you have a certificate lifecycle management tool, you can move from CA to CA with a couple of clicks. And so it's important to be crypto agile, be able to move from key type to key type, from CA to CA. And the only way to do that is through proper certificate lifecycle management. And yeah, Jason, I know I don't think it's discovered or talked about, but I would love for you to kind of just talk a little bit of Harvest and Decrypt and what that means for customers.
That's perfect. Thank you, Brent. Yeah, I will. Let's talk about the fact that the problem is not a tomorrow problem. The problem is right now. When you have a situation like a bad guy who is inside your network, who is simply recording a packet stream, that could be something that's really not a difficult to achieve thing for an adversary and would be incredibly difficult to detect due to the passive nature of what the bad guy's doing. You have to ask yourself, which of those which of those encrypted data streams would I be most upset if those were to be decrypted 2030 and beyond? And I think the truthful answer is it's probably an 80-20 rule or something like that, where the vast majority of what's going across that wire encrypted with RSA or ECC is probably very transactional in nature. It's probably, if it were to be decrypted in 5 to even 10 years from now, you wouldn't be too upset. The problem, though, is that I guarantee all of you have some form of secret that's going across. That could be personally identifiable information, which falls under regulatory schemes of just about everyone, to intellectual property, to, again, if you are in regulated industries, things like HIPAA information, healthcare information, etc. What happens if that were to be decrypted at some point in the future? That would be a bad thing. So therefore, thinking about a modern private certificate authority to use quantum resistant cryptographic algorithms for that form of encryption, that is something that I think I would love you to give us a call and have Brendan go through with you, or one of our teammates that can actually talk about, once you've done your inventory of digital certificates, inventory of your cryptographic assets, you must be doing inventory of the risk that is associated with those assets. So how are you using your certificates? What exactly is it encrypting? And I think that that exercise will surprise all of you. And it's going to require a top-down driven exercise that is cross-functional. And I think that that's what's going to be the hardest thing about it. It isn't going to be about the technology. Getting those lists isn't going to be hard. It's going to be understanding the context of what's going on inside of those systems. So, folks, if you think it doesn't apply to you, the risk isn't about me, little old me. I'm not a gigantic, Fortune 5. I'm not a bank. Trust me, it's everybody who has electricity needs to be concerned about this. And so the harvest and decrypt problem, Brendan, is one half of, I think, another problem that I like to talk about now, which is the trust now and forge later problem, which has to do with the fact that many of you are document signing or code signing something right now, where if that digital signature were to be able to be spoofed, or signed documents were be able to be changed at some point in the future, you trust those documents that you're signing right now. Many of those documents are going to live far beyond the 2030 to 2035 timeframe. What happens if the forgeability of those documents became a thing? So harvest now, decrypt later, trust now, forge later. Two sets of the same coin. One has to do with authentication, one has to do with encryption, one has to do with signing. And folks, I tell you, when you think about the whole thing, it's really part of what you need to be doing about taking inventory about that entire risk. So that's a lot of words, Brenda, but you asked for it.
I did. No, it's perfect.
Next slide. Perfect.
Um,
So, yeah,
I'll,
Brendan, go
I'll,
take it.
I'll jump on this one. Yeah. So this is, I can't really share the customer, but we had a large financial customer that was utilizing Citigo public certificates. And we had the discussion kind of we're having today where we were talking about, mutual TLS. They were using mutual TLS because they would acquire new banking companies. And they would need to have a secure connection between each entity. and they were utilizing public certificates for that. And so we're realizing, the customers realizing that that's going to go away. And we solved it through a Citigo Private CA. So we created a route and several issuing CAs for the different entities. We established the trust between the two or three, it's actually more than that, but between company A and company B with the private CA, and then we automated certificates where they needed to be for those client authentication purposes. So yeah, it's a really simple process. Once you establish the trust, deploy the certificates with automation, and the end result was more secure trust between those entities. So the customer is extremely happy because they get to go away thinking, okay, now we're using certificates for authentication, but we're using only our private certificates. It's not trusted in the world.
Thanks. Next slide. Yeah, I would say that one of the things I'm going to repeat is this concept of we're ringing the bell. I think that Brendan and I, we're representatives from a private certificate authority vendor, a public certificate authority vendor, but I think that what needs to happen here is we're trying to help you internally make the case for making sure that you don't end up in this situation where these timeframes around the changes of publicly trusted certificates and the exit of client authentication certificates from our world will surprise you. I don't want anybody to be surprised who is anywhere near the sphere of myself, Brendan, or anybody else who works for Sectigo. Regardless of what you do, regardless of the vendor that you choose to work with, we want you to make the business case for making these changes. This is just so important because the downtime that we fear that you might be facing, my God, it's written here on the page. I don't even want to say the words. It's actually a little bit too scary to think about. And Brenda and I are not in the FUD business, so I think we'll leave it here as a document. But if you screenshot this and use it as part of your business case for how you're going to talk to people internally, please use this new knowledge that you have and talk to people and then come to us and then we're going to help you out.
I'll, I'll
Next
give
slide.
a quick story on one of these is service downtime, and it's something to think about, especially as we go down to 47-day certificates, is to have good policy, good governance over what you're doing. I had a client last year during the holiday season, and they thought they were doing some great practices with having a code freeze during the holiday season, but they didn't account for certificates expiring during that code freeze. And they were forced to watch their servers go down with certificates going and being expired. And they couldn't do anything about it. So it's great to have policy. It's great to think about, governance and what's going to happen. But there's better paths forward, especially when it comes to change management and code freezes, when it comes to certificate deployment, and we'd be happy to have that conversation with you.
Great example. So right now, it's all about taking inventory of your digital certificates, and there are multiple reasons for doing it, both for publicly trusted purposes, internal and private purposes. Understand which systems are using client authentication certificates. That is a homework exercise for immediately. I'm talking right now, folks. This is really important. There isn't a ton of time to waste. Brendan went through the slide that actually went through the time frames, and things are going to happen really fast. Brendan, what do we do next?
The next move is discover, understand what's out there, have a conversation with us if you haven't already. Especially our sales engineering team, we'd be happy to kind of discuss that, next 30 to 90 days, what you should be doing, what you should be evaluating. And we're doing this every day, so we'd be happy to kind of give you any expertise as far as what should be done in the future.
Thanks, Matt. Next slide.
I don't
Brendan, I
need
think
this
you
one.
covered this. I think you
Yeah.
covered this, and I think we can move on. But, just to suffice to say, this ain't your grandpa's PKI, and that pretty picture on the right's not just a pretty picture. That actually belies a lot of functionality that Brendan can set up for you very, very quickly. So let's move on to the next one. Brendan, this is
Um,
yours.
yeah, thank you. Yeah, this is the overview of what we can do on the private CA. Couple different options, especially if you're not looking to host your own and take care of your own on-prem private CA, is you can come to Cetigo and we'll take care of the private CAs for you. And so some of the more popular models is the fully hosted option and the hybrid private CA option. And they're pretty similar. But the fully hosted option, Cetigo would take care of root and issuing CA structures for you. We'll work with you and team to understand, what we need as far as, key type and validity period, and we'll come up with a plan on, the best path forward when it comes to that. But the best thing is that, Cetigo, being that we have 27 plus years of being a public CA, that knowledge, that power, we will translate that into a private CA that we'll host for you. So we'll take care of the root issuing CA, put them in an HSM, have the redundancy, take care of the security and compliance, and really just allow you to free up, those private CA creation tasks, and really just get to a point where we're deploying certificates directly into your environment. So that's a fully hosted option. The hybrid option is extremely similar, except for the fact that you would own the root CA. So you would give us a signing certificate request. We would host the issuing CAs for you, but you would still own root ownership of that certificate. Next slide.
So, yeah, Brendan, I'm gonna cap that one off by saying that I'm just so impressed with how the simplicity of standing up a private certificate authority does not take away from its trust model flexibility. That's an important thing to note, and you've covered it here really well. Thank you. Next
Yep.
slide. This is
And
yours as
then
well.
Yeah, this is the high level overview of Cetigo Certificate Manager, and I know I can spend over a half hour just talking on this side alone, so I'll be very brief on this. But Cetigo has done a really good job at using the steps of certificate lifecycle management, and building out Cetigo Certificate Manager. So we want to have that discovery feature. You'll see over in the middle section, discover the existing certificates. We then have the ability to deploy certificates, that are coming up for expiration with all the different certificate authorities that you're seeing in the top right. And then we have on the left-hand side, all the different ways of deploying certificates into your environment through the different protocols, agents, and integrations. Again, I won't go into all this, but we do a good job at getting into your major cloud services, your load balancers, your firewall systems, your web servers, your DevOps tools. There's a method of the madness of deploying a certificate, and we'd be happy to have that conversation with you.
I'm going to leave it with one last idea here, Brendan, because I want to get to some questions right after this. But I think that the thing that I want to leave everyone with is what might be a new idea for many of you, which is the ability to have visibility across all certificate types, whether it's for publicly trusted usage, whether it's for your various disparate private CA usages, whether you need a new private CA, evaluating what those use cases are, understanding the context, having a single vendor to work with, having very transparent pricing for all of this, having it turnkey, cloud native. Folks, this is something that I think a lot of you just aren't used to. And having that one-stop shop underneath a single certificate lifecycle management platform that Brendan was just telling you about, that is surprisingly new for many of you listening to this, and how you're going to solve these multiple problems that are being handed to you by industry. And Brendan, any last comments before we take questions?
No, I just want to say that Cetigo is extremely passionate about this, and we'd be happy to have any conversation that you might have outside of the questions that you have to make sure that we get you to the right solution. We have industry experts, Jason Sirocco, Tim Callan, Nick France. We have a great sales engineering team and a team that really just wants to understand what your use cases are and help solve the problem. So we'd be happy to have those conversations with you.
Yeah, I think that for those of you who want to know more, a webinar is great, but I think that sometimes reading through the material that's well presented, one of our colleagues with us put together this document. The link is there. Basically, this downloadable materials with a lot more explanation, a lot more diagrams, a lot more information for you is there, but I'm certain that many of you have questions for us right now, and I think we can go to the questions after this. But before we do that, I'm going to go give a plug. Myself and Tim Callan have a podcast. If any of this information is of interest to you, Tim Callan and I cover industry information and news. I think in a way that helps to keep you up to date on what's going on. We give deep explainers, and everything that was talked about here on this podcast has actually been discussed at length in multiple podcasts. Please check us out wherever you use your podcast. In fact, now we have a video version of this on YouTube as well, which I hope will be included on this slide at some point in the future. And Brendan, we're going to get you on as a guest at some point real soon as well. But thanks for that.
I'm a subscriber, so I'll be happy to.
There you go.
All right, so we can jump into some quick questions. So this one should be pretty fast. Cutoff date for client authentication in June. If you renew before that June timeframe, will your certificate be valid through the end of its expiration date, or it's going to be a problem for you in June?
No, once the certificate's issued with the client authentication, it'll be valid. So if you issue all the certificates in May, it'll still be valid for the entire length of the certificate, which will be a 200-day certificate at that point, because public certificates are going down to 200 days in March. So as Jason had mentioned, everything is kind of intertwined there. So look out for that.
So going back to this DCV question that was in very early in the slides, that is also going to step down eventually down to 1 week to 10 days. So the time frame for that just mirrors the time frame for public certificates stepping
Up
down.
until 2029. In 2029, instead of having a 47-day DCV, it'll be a 10-day DCV. So 2029 date, you have a 47-day cert and a 10-day DCV.
So as far as the automation of those certificates goes, what do we at Sectigo offer for automating?
I want to separate those two things. So there's automation of certificates, and then there's automation of DCV. Cetigo has a solution for both. So we can, with that spider slide, we can go over that, but we have many different ways of deploying those certificates into your cloud services, load balancers, firewalls, web servers, etc. The DCV validation, that's a different tool that we have automation for as well. So Cetigo has the ability today connect into a lot of your most popular DNS providers: GoDaddy, Cloudflare, Azure, AWS, Akamai, OVH, DNS Simple, and we're adding more to this as well. That you can do that 10-day DCV automation where you don't have to do anything. Our tooling just takes care of that for you.
Perfect, thanks. So we're pretty close to time here as far as questions. There was one more question about just kind of the pricing structure for private CA. I think that one is probably better to discuss with your AE. So we can definitely have
I
them
see that question
follow
here.
up.
So Stephen, I'm sorry. It says we're having an on-prem CA as well. So yeah, you can connect your on-prem CA through our CA connector, and we can deploy certificates from that. So if you're on-prem already today, you like it, and you want to expand on that, as we mentioned, we have the ability to tie into it and then deploy certificates from it as well. And then the fully hosted option that we described, has its own associated costs. Talk to your AE, but you'll find that it's really cost effective versus stand up your own CA with the same security and compliance that we set up for it.
And just had a question come in about a timeline for enabling automated DCV with Blue Cat. I don't know if we have a public roadmap for that right now, or
Yes, we do have Blue Cat. It's one of the most requested ones. We will have the validation set up with Blue Cat. I don't have an exact date, but it is being worked on as we speak.
All right, perfect. Thanks. And that was a quick rush, but we're right at time and we're right through all the questions. So thanks, Jason. Thanks, Brendan. Great work today. And we'll share out the recording with everybody here shortly.
Thanks, guys.
Yeah.